I found this set of Ethan Allen end tables at Goodwill the other day, and they were only $40, so you know I had to take them home and get flipping. Ethan Allen finds are some of my favorite flips ever just because they're built so well and they really do make easy flips and great transformations. This pair was in amazing condition. It just was a little dated and needed something to refresh it and bring it back into modern day style. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. Strip it back to bare wood, add some paint for some color, and replace those old hardware pulls for a complete transformation. So let's get into it. Starting off any flip, what I usually do is try to remove any drawers, any hinges, any doors, just to make it easier to work with. I really wasn't the biggest fan of these hardware pulls that came with it, so I went ahead and removed them, and we're gonna go ahead and replace them later on. Then was time to remove some of this old stain. I wanted to keep the top and that bottom shelf bare wood, but it was covered in a really thick top coat and that old dark stain that I wasn't the biggest fan of. Using a chemical stripper like this one is a little bit better than going in with the sander because this piece I actually had come to realize was veneer, so if I went in with a low grit sandpaper, it probably would have burned right through that veneer and we wouldn't have been able to use the wood that I really wanted to highlight. I made sure to lather that stripper on. You don't want to be shy when it comes to actually applying the stripper, and then I just let it set for about 15 to 20 minutes, and after that, using a putty knife, I was able to go ahead and just scrape off all that old top coat and some of the stain that was left over, which will make a huge difference and let me now go into sanding without having to use such an abrasive sandpaper. I could start at a little bit higher grit, like a 220. This bottom shelf was a little bit trickier to strip just because it's like at an awkward angle for me to reach down under, but I also got all the stripper removed from there and then moved on to the cleanup. The only bad thing about using stripper is it makes a mess and it's so sticky once you let it dry for a little bit, so using some acetone really helps to cut any of that tackiness and any leftover residue that you might have on your piece. You can also see here I had some trouble getting the stripper to stick to these little edges on the side table, so all I'm doing is just putting a little bit of acetone on a rag and applying some light pressure, and that acetone actually just eats through that old finish, and you could use it to do some detail touch-ups or any tight corners that the stripper might have missed. Just make sure you use a respirator when you're working with chemical strippers or acetone because it really is some nasty stuff. Now with the top and that bottom shelf stripped, I can move into sanding, and like I said, I'm using a higher grit sandpaper to start because it's going to be a lot more gentle on the wood, and that's the whole reason I use the chemical stripper. I'm starting off with a 180 grit foam pad, which will really help me get through that initial layer of old stain that was left over after the chemical stripper, and using the foam pad kind of helps me play with the unevenness of where the stripper worked a little bit harder versus where it didn't. This first pass with the foam pad also really helps on these edges because you need to be a little bit more careful and detailed or you will burn through the veneer there. With everything almost fully sanded down from that foam pad, I now can switch over back to a regular sanding pad in a 220 grit, which is the highest grit that I want to use on this table. These final passes will help even out the wood tone and get it ready for the actual stain itself. I also just repeated the same process of my foam pad and my regular sanding pad on that bottom level as well. I've talked about this in my Furniture Flipping 101 masterclass on sanding, how important it is to wipe down your surfaces after sanding, because you could see here it doesn't look that dirty, but when you look at my rag after, you could see it is filled with sawdust and debris that's left over. And if we don't remove that before going in with stain, the stain is going to appear blotchy and uneven, which you really don't want, especially after spending so much time sanding. Now I'm just applying a quick layer of pre-stain just to ensure that when my stain goes on, it's as even as possible. For this set, I'm actually going to be using a spray stain by Varathane, which I've used before, and I really love how it works. It's so beginner friendly, and I feel like stain can be pretty intimidating sometimes for furniture flippers that are just beginning. The spray stain really helps to give you an even tone across your whole surface, and I also like to pair it with this little handle that I picked up that can attach to any type of spray can, spray paint, or spray stain like this, and helps the application be even smoother. You can see when I'm wiping it back how beautiful that wood tone is. It's the perfect kind of neutral medium tone that still gives some warmth and will pair perfectly with the paint color that I chose. I'm wiping the stain back almost immediately after spraying just because I don't want it to be too dark, and then just repeated that process on all 4 surfaces. I want to let that stain fully dry overnight so it has time to cure. So now I'm moving on to my drawer fronts. For the drawer fronts, I want to add some custom box molding just because I think box box molding really enhances any piece, and it's really not that hard to do once you get the hang of it. I took some initial measurements of the drawer fronts and then brought those measurements over to these trim pieces that I had left over from a previous piece. For these smaller trims, I don't want to use my big beefy miter saw because it's just going to tear through that trim and crack it and chip it. So I have this mini miter saw that I've talked about in the past. It's one of the best purchases that I made, especially for doing box molding so often. It really helps be a lot gentler on these smaller trims and make super precise cuts. I'll be sure to add the link to it in the description of this video. It's really not that expensive either. I think it's under $100 and I use it all the time. It's perfect for projects like these or anytime you want to add some trim detail to your furniture pieces. The other nice thing about it is you could actually adjust the angles of the cut to make miter cuts. So when I'm doing box molding, I like to angle my corners so when I actually join them together, they're super flush and look professional. I got all my pieces cut down to the sizes that I needed for the box molding itself and then took them over to the drawer fronts and started to get them glued down. The method that I found is the easiest for actually applying the box molding is just using a marker to mark out all the exact corners of where you want the box molding to lay, and then you have a foundation to actually lay the pieces without guessing. And I like to go ahead and glue down the first piece and then nail that down so I have a solid foundation to base my other 3 pieces off of. This allows you to adjust those last 3 pieces if you have to, just to make sure everything's even. And then I'm going in and using some quick set spackle to fill in all those nail holes. So I go ahead, fill them, let them dry, and then sand them down. Then I actually repeat that process one more time just to make sure that you don't see any of those divots in the paint layer. Once all my trim is attached, it's time to move on to scuff sanding the body of where I didn't sand down and stain the wood. This is just because I want my paint to stick and not to run off, so doing a quick scuff sand kind of roughs up the surface and gives the paint something to stick to rather than this slick, glossy surface. The paint that I'm using for this project is actually a product that I've never used before, and I kept seeing it on Amazon. The brand name is Heirloom Traditions, and it's their all-in-one paint. This is actually specifically in the color Haven, which is this really light blue, almost gray tone, which I love, and I think it's going to pair perfectly with that more neutral, warm wood stain that we picked. What I really love about this paint the most is that it has a built-in primer and top coat, so you don't have to worry about either of those steps, and it really saves you time when painting. I went ahead and hand painted these pieces just because they were a little bit smaller, but you could also use this paint in a paint sprayer if you're doing a larger dresser, which will save you so much time, and you also won't have to worry about those 2 other steps. Even though you don't need a primer, you still probably need at least 2 to 3 coats of this paint because you could see here on these drawer fronts, this is my first layer and it still is a little bit blotchy, but even when I go in already with my second layer, it already starts to smooth out and look really, really finished and refined. Then one of my favorite parts of any flip is getting to remove all the covering and tape that I put on to really see the piece come together. So now I could tell how beautiful the pairing of the wood tone that we chose and the paint color, and I'm getting really excited about adding the final hardware and getting this thing wrapped up. I made some quick measurements of where the center of each of my drawers were and then just used my drill to drill in some new hardware holes for the poles that I'm about to attach on to each of the drawer fronts. I didn't do it here, but I would recommend putting a little layer of tape down before you drill. It'll just help with the cleanup, but I just have my shop vac here and I'm going in and making sure everything is clean and no paint is messed up, but we are good to go and ready to attach our new hardware. I'm actually just using some hardware that I had left over from my previous flip. If you saw it in my last video, the green dresser, these are the same hardware poles. I actually had 2 left over, which was perfect because that was the exact amount I needed for both of these side tables. Our paint already had a built-in top coat, but the raw wood was unsealed, so I'm using a wipe-on polyurethane, which is a really beginner-friendly top coat that I recommend anybody to use. It's super easy. You just pour a little bit on and then use a microfiber sponge to spread it around, and it gives a beautiful sheen to your stain and also will protect it from any lamps, decorations, or books that are put on top of these end tables. Then moving back to the beginning and where we all started, these were those $40 Ethan Allen end tables that I found at Goodwill, waiting to be fully refinished and brought back to life. And after their full transformation, these nightstands look absolutely amazing. I am obsessed with the paint color paired with the wood tones that we chose on that stain, and then the small hint of antique brass really just ties the whole piece together. I also feel like I'm proving my point of how much a small detail like box molding on these drawer fronts really make the piece look so much more elevated and expensive, and it's such a small, easy detail to add to any type of furniture piece that you have in your home to really take it to that next level. Like I said before, I bought both of these end tables for only $40 at Goodwill, and now with them fully transformed, I plan to resell them on Facebook Marketplace for $300. I'm curious to know how much you would pay for a set just like these and what your thoughts are on the paint and stain combo, so let me know down in the comments. Stay tuned for the next full flip transformation, and as always, I will see you guys in the next one.